Kenny. Deputy Claire Daly. You have 10 minutes, Deputy Daly.
Thanks, Cian Corla, and I'd like to salute Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan. I'm sure it's quite poignant for her that she is following in the footsteps of Tony Gregory, who shockingly moved a similar bill 23 years ago now. And when we assembled at the press conference the other day, there were pictures of Mary Robinson and Michael D. Higgins and their contribution from the debate around the original bill that Deputy O'Sullivan is proposing to amend 40 years ago, calling for an urgency in dealing with this issue. And 40 years later, we're still hearing the same arguments. There is no difference of opinion. Hair coursing is a brutal, barbarous, wanton cruelty and has no part in a modern society. And I say it's a fact and can back it up because in the last Dáil we brought in legislation in relation to animal health and welfare, guidelines which I didn't think went far enough, but in fairness to former Minister Coveney, they went dramatically further than anything we'd had before. But we specifically put in that an exclusion for hair coursing, so acknowledging the activity was cruel and then removing the hair from the protection of that act, demonstrably showing that you accept its cruelty, but you're prepared to let it go on. And quite frankly, that is just not good enough. And to be honest, the contribution by the Fianna Fáil deputy I found absolutely astounding, because apart from repeating generalities, in actual fact the deputy was not dealing, there's no hysteria on this side. We are actually responding to facts and to information that's given not from a third party, but from the people who attend coursing meetings, from the vets, from the National Parks and Wildlife officers, and some of the people who are in the gallery who regularly monitor the activities there. So what are we talking about and what goes on? A little hair, 6 to 8 pounds. What's the first step on his journey? Well, he's netted in a process where club members go out in the countryside, set up nets, scream and frighten the hares to strategically put them into nets. They're then put into a box, solitary, quiet, timid creatures kept in a box in captivity. They're not used to that. Then they're released, apart from the stress of that, which has been scientifically evaluated by the vets that attend. They're trained to run from dogs, released onto the course, yelled at by club members and so on. And I challenge anybody, look at the pictures of a greyhound with these muscles clenched back, 10, 20 times the size of a hare, going for that hare. When this was debated in this House 23 years ago, my former constituency colleague Trevor Sargent played a tape recording of a hare screaming and crying. And I was going to do it today, but to be honest, I just couldn't, because it is absolutely horrendous. That's not ignorance, that's an absolute fact. And the idea that people could assemble in a field, and it's generally men, and it's men whose attendance are dwindling, because you can cod yourselves all you like that this is a natural rustic pursuit, that Mammy, Daddy, Ben and Jane go out on a Sunday afternoon. I can tell you they do not. It is generally a male support, and people standing round and cheering the massacre of another creature is abhorrent, because they may not be able to be got with the teeth of a greyhound, but as Deputy O'Sullivan said, with claws, fear and so on, it's just horrendous. The points have been made. If it was a sport is a challenge of equals, willing participants. We can't call this a sport. It is ridiculous to say that this is in the Department of Arts. Do you think the gallery that was full of people yesterday fighting for the arts would think it's a good idea that hair coursing is covered by the same minister? It's absolutely ridiculous that that would be the case. Other deputies have said, oh, well, we need to do it. My God, those hares, they'd be going around running riot all over the country if we didn't control them. Absolute rubbish as well. In fact, in the UK and Northern Ireland, when this was barbarism was banned, it was made clear that there was no need to control the numbers. In fact, hares are a biodiversity action plan species in Northern Ireland and in the UK, meaning that they are among the most threatened mammals requiring conservation action in Ireland. Habitat loss, human expansion, land management changes and persecution actually have resulted in the Irish hare population being in serious decline across the country, and in areas here on our doorstep there are actually no hares left on Dublin's North Bull Island, none whatsoever. So it's not true to say that the population is not multiplying. It's not a tradition. Let's get that clear. At least it's certainly not an Irish tradition. This barbaric pursuit was planted here by the English aristocracy, something I thought actually that Fianna Fáil, as the great nationalists, might have had a problem with. But in any case, it's a cruel spectacle for lordships, the first rules being drawn up under the reign of Elizabeth I and the Duke of Norfolk. But even if it was an Irish tradition, it used to be an Italian tradition to go down to the Colosseum on a Friday night and watch people being eaten by lions. It used to be a tradition to display people in freak shows, but society moves on and civilization takes note of what needs to be done. And it's just not acceptable that we would cling to outdated ideology in order to support what is cruelty and what is recognised cruelty. Now, a report commissioned even by the British government shortly before it voted on the ban to ban hunting said, "We're satisfied that being pursued, caught and killed by dogs in the coursing seriously compromises the welfare of the hares." I don't have time, but your so-called regulation and the measures that you've put in place to protect the hare, I'm sorry, but it's just not good enough. We know from the statistics, and in fact from Freedom of Information documents, reveal clinically the abuses that take place in our coursing season every year. In Clonmel, for example, over 3 days of coursing, where there were 188 hares in captivity, there was a claim that not one hare was struck. Simply not the case, simply couldn't possibly be true. Over 7,000 hares were taken last year. Only 17 of the 75 official events were monitored. So when you say with great authority that everything is great and everything is fine, we can answer you and to say you can't say that because your officers haven't been there to monitor what's gone on. And in actual fact, the testimony, which I don't have time to read, but from East Donegal, from my own constituency, where sadly the only part of Dublin is Balbriggan, where coursers stated in one instance 2 hares require assistance, 1 dying, but veterinary reports saying something different. That experience is repeated all across the different counties, and the post-mortems carried out on those hares show the clear evidence of cruelty and trauma in them. And for what? Why do we have to do this? What's to be gained from it? OK, there are humane alternatives to live coursing. Drag coursing using a mechanical lure would eliminate once and for all this horrific cruelty. And also, Maureen, as Deputy O'Sullivan said, there'd be no longer need in that instance, for example, to muzzle the greyhounds, which is cruel in and of itself. There'd no longer be a need to take hares from their natural environment to be terrorised and baited. Wildlife rangers would no longer be obliged to attend meetings and keep an eye on the behaviour of coursing clubs, so then they might have time to actually deal with the activities that you were talking about, the hare lurching and so on. I mean, somebody made a comment going on, oh, you know, there was a spike in criminals bagging hares in England when they did this. Do you think the hare cares whether he was taken up by a lord in a pair of jodhpurs or a young fella from a council estate somewhere? It doesn't make any difference. Cruelty is cruelty no matter what. And if you prohibited this activity, then your officers would have time to do the job they were designed to do. There would no longer be a conflict between the clubs and animal welfare activists. A switch to drag actually could give a dramatic boost to coursing clubs, as people who consciously would stay away from the barbarism would actually decide to maybe go along and have a day out. It's a possible and very viable alternative. This is not a rural-urban divide. There are many people all over rural communities who find this utterly abhorrent. And the idea that dealing with this now is going to drive it underground is simply laughable. There are many activities that went on years ago that are now banned that don't go on nowadays. You talk about, oh, well, there would be an impact on the local economy. All of the sponsors have withdrawn from these activities. If there was money to be made and this was popular, they wouldn't have done that. Numbers are dwindling, the crowds are down. This is a relic of a barbarous type of activity that most people in Ireland, no matter where they live, want no part of it. But yet again, the political establishment lags behind the consciousness of people. We have a chance to deal with this next Thursday, and I would urge people to break the whip and do so.
Thank you very much.